In the early months of 1835, the streets of Salvador, Bahia, Brazil, were alive with tension, whispers of rebellion, and the quiet determination of a community determined to reclaim its freedom. This was the setting for one of the most remarkable, yet often overlooked, uprisings in Latin American history, the Malê Revolt. Unlike many other slave uprisings of the era, this movement was not only about resisting the chains of slavery, it was also deeply rooted in faith, culture, and the unyielding desire for dignity. Led primarily by African Muslim slaves and freedmen, known collectively as the Malês, this revolt was a testament to courage in the face of seemingly insurmountable oppression. The Malês were part of a vibrant and resilient community in Salvador, a city that had become a cultural and economic hub for Afro-Brazilian life. These men and women brought with them the knowledge, traditions, and religious practices of their African homelands, particularly Islam. In a society that sought to suppress their faith and limit their freedoms, the Malês cultivated a strong sense of identity and solidarity. They gathered in secret, educated one another, and forged bonds that would later form the backbone of the revolt. For them, Islam was not only a spiritual guide but also a source of empowerment, offering a framework for justice, leadership, and moral courage. But what drove the Malês to rise up in 1835? Life under the brutal system of slavery in Bahia was harsh, marked by grueling labor, systemic discrimination, and the constant threat of violence. Yet, the revolt was more than a reaction to physical hardship. It was a profound assertion of self-determination, an effort to reclaim agency over their own lives. As the planning of the revolt unfolded, the Malês demonstrated strategic intelligence, organizing their forces with precision, using coded messages, and timing their actions to coincide with Ramadan, the holy month of fasting and reflection. This deliberate choice reflected not only religious devotion, but also the discipline and solidarity that made their movement so formidable. When the night of January 24th arrived, the city braced for the upheaval that was about to unfold. Hundreds of Malês, armed with courage and conviction, moved through Salvador with a singular purpose: to challenge the oppressive structures that had long sought to keep them subjugated. The revolt was swift, intense, and marked by moments of profound heroism. Though ultimately suppressed by government forces, the uprising left an indelible mark on history, highlighting the resilience, intellect, and unbreakable spirit of the Malê community. Today, the story of the Malê Revolt continues to resonate as a powerful reminder of resistance, faith, and the pursuit of justice. It is a chapter of history that deserves to be remembered, celebrated, and shared. If you are fascinated by stories of courage and determination from the past, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that brings history to life. Let us explore these incredible journeys together and honor the voices that refuse to be silenced. Life for the Malês in Salvador was a complex tapestry of resilience and oppression, a story woven with faith, community, and the daily struggle to survive under a system designed to strip them of identity and agency. These African Muslims were bound not only by chains of labor, but also by the invisible constraints placed upon their beliefs and traditions. A dual form of oppression that penetrated the deepest layers of their existence. In the bustling streets of Bahia, where the rhythm of the city pulsed with trade and social hierarchies, the Malês lived under constant surveillance, aware that any deviation from the rigid social order could provoke violent retribution. Yet they carried themselves with quiet determination, keeping alive the practices and rituals that defined them. Prayer, study, and the observance of religious holidays became acts of subtle defiance, ways to assert their humanity in a world that sought to deny it. And each whispered verse of the Quran or secret gathering for reflection was a reaffirmation that they were more than property. more than the sum of forced labor, more than the stereotypes imposed upon them by a society determined to erase their cultural and spiritual identity. Discrimination against the Malês took many forms, extending beyond the visible brutality of slavery into the invisible mechanisms of control that permeated daily life. Their religious practices, so central to their sense of self, were restricted or outright banned in public, forcing them to adapt rituals to hidden spaces, dimly lit rooms, or the cover of night. Even the simplest acts of communal worship could be interpreted as seditious. And yet the Malês persevered, teaching one another the tenets of Islam, reciting prayers with care, and preserving the knowledge of their homelands. The oral transmission of sacred texts, the passing down of stories from elders to youth, and the quiet celebration of holy days became lifelines that connected them to a broader, transatlantic heritage that slavery sought to sever. In this environment, faith was inseparable from resistance, and religious devotion was not merely spiritual nourishment but a strategic and psychological shield against the dehumanization imposed by a society that refused to recognize their full personhood. The harsh conditions of slavery compounded the oppression they faced, shaping the contours of daily life with exhaustion, fear, and uncertainty. Long hours of grueling labor in the sugarcane fields, the heat of the sun, and the relentless demands of overseers were punctuated by punishments that served as constant reminders of the precariousness of their existence. Families were fragmented, communities disrupted, and the social fabric that had once bound them together in Africa was forcibly torn apart, leaving only fragments of identity preserved in memory and clandestine practice. Despite these adversities, the Malês developed networks of solidarity, finding ways to communicate, plan, and sustain each other in a landscape designed to isolate and intimidate them. These networks became the backbone of the revolt that would erupt in 1835, a culmination of years of quietly sustained courage, careful organization, and unbroken belief in a future where they could assert their dignity and faith without fear. In the months leading up to the uprising, the tension in Salvador was palpable, an almost imperceptible undercurrent that threaded through the markets, workshops, and streets where the Malês moved with a dual consciousness, outwardly compliant to survive, inwardly preparing for a decisive moment when oppression would be challenged. The city itself became a stage for a drama that had been decades in the making, where every glance, every whispered instruction, and every carefully coded message carried the weight of generations yearning for justice. The participants of the Malê Revolt were not merely reacting to immediate injustices. They were channeling centuries of experience, knowledge, and cultural memory, transforming personal suffering into collective strategy. And the spiritual discipline of their faith guided both their planning and their courage. When the night of the revolt arrived, it was the culmination of countless acts of quiet resistance, each prayer offered under cover, each lesson shared in secrecy, and each moment of endurance that had prepared the Malês to confront a society that had sought to erase them. The revolt itself was swift and intense, a concentrated expression of frustration, hope, and calculated defiance, reflecting not only the skill and planning of its participants, but also the profound depth of their conviction, even as authorities moved to suppress the uprising with brutal force. The Malês' commitment to their faith and their vision of freedom remained unbroken, demonstrating that spiritual resilience and cultural identity could provide both the framework and the strength to challenge oppression. Ultimately, the experience of the Malês in Salvador illustrates a powerful truth, that oppression cannot fully extinguish the human spirit when it is nourished by faith, culture, and communal solidarity. The restrictions placed on their religious practice and the hardships of enslavement were met not with resignation, but with creativity, courage, and unwavering determination, leaving a legacy that transcends the immediate events of the revolt. Through their perseverance, the Malês showed that survival under systemic oppression is not simply about enduring pain, but about cultivating identity, sustaining hope, and asserting humanity even in circumstances designed to deny it. The story of the Malê community is, therefore, not only a historical account of rebellion, but also a testament to the enduring power of belief, unity, and resistance in the face of relentless adversity. Throughout the streets and alleys of Salvador, Bahia, in the early 1830s, the lives of the Malê community were shaped by a constant tension between survival and aspiration, a tension that gave rise to a quiet but potent determination to claim autonomy over every aspect of their existence. For both the enslaved and the free blacks of the city, the daily reality was a mixture of labor, surveillance, and systemic restriction, yet beneath this surface lay a rich network of cultural and spiritual life that enabled them to resist in ways that were both subtle and profound. They sought not merely to endure the limitations imposed upon them, but to assert their right to exist as full human beings, to maintain control over their social interactions, to preserve the integrity of their faith, and to imagine a world in which their voices and choices could shape their destiny rather than be dictated entirely by the constraints of slavery and discrimination. In this context, resistance was not a single act of rebellion but a continuous, multifaceted endeavor that infused every aspect of life with meaning and defiance. Whether through secret gatherings, the clandestine teaching of religious texts, or the meticulous planning of coordinated actions that might one day disrupt the oppressive structures around them, the drive for social autonomy manifested in the ways the Malês maintained their communities and interpersonal networks, despite efforts by authorities to fragment them. Enslaved individuals formed bonds not only with fellow laborers but with freedmen who had navigated the boundaries of legal freedom, creating a bridge between constrained lives and the possibility of self-determination. This blending of experiences allowed knowledge, skills, and strategies to circulate within the community, enabling members to support one another in practical and psychological ways. Markets, workshops, and social gatherings became nodes of subtle negotiation and teaching, spaces where cultural norms could be preserved and adapted in response to oppressive conditions. Every conversation, every shared meal, and every whispered exchange of information strengthened a sense of identity that had been threatened by the dehumanizing apparatus of slavery. In these networks, the Malês cultivated leadership, mutual aid, and a shared vision of autonomy that extended beyond mere survival, nurturing aspirations for a society in which they could participate fully and openly without fear. Religious autonomy was central to this broader struggle, as Islam provided both structure and inspiration for resisting oppression. Observance of prayer, fasting, and ritual in secret became acts of empowerment, signaling that even under severe restrictions, the Malês retained authority over their spiritual lives. Knowledge of scripture, memorization of sacred texts, and the sharing of teachings from one generation to the next allowed the community to anchor itself in a shared ethical and moral framework that guided daily decisions. Strategic planning and responses to injustice. In a society that sought to erase their cultural and religious heritage, each act of worship was simultaneously a reaffirmation of identity and a challenge to the social order, illustrating the inseparability of faith and resistance in their pursuit of autonomy. Political autonomy, though more constrained by circumstance, was envisioned through both concrete and symbolic actions. Discussions of leadership, the coordination of resistance strategies, and the creation of coded communication networks allowed the Malês to exercise agency within a context that sought to deny them voice and influence. Planning for rebellion required an intricate understanding of social hierarchies, timing, and local geography, as well as the careful management of risk, demonstrating that the desire for self-determination encompassed intelligence, foresight, and collective decision-making. By asserting control over these strategic elements, the Malês expressed a form of political consciousness that was both daring and necessary, proving that autonomy could be pursued even when formal avenues for influence were systematically denied. This persistent striving for autonomy was also a statement of resilience against the psychological pressures of oppression. The very act of imagining a world in which one could move freely, worship openly, and participate in community decision-making fostered a sense of hope and purpose that sustained individuals through the daily hardships of labor and subjugation. It reinforced the understanding that freedom was not only a legal or physical state, but also an intellectual, moral, and spiritual one, cultivated through practice, solidarity, and shared belief. The interplay of these dimensions, social, religious, and political, created a rich tapestry of resistance in which every choice, ritual, and plan became an assertion of selfhood and a challenge to the structures that sought to diminish it. As the Malês moved from quiet resistance to coordinated uprising, this desire for autonomy crystallized into decisive action, culminating in the revolt of 1835. The uprising itself was a manifestation of years of preparation, learning, and subtle defense, a moment when the persistent pursuit of self-determination found expression in collective action. It demonstrated that the drive for autonomy was not abstract or theoretical but tangible, capable of inspiring coordinated strategy, disciplined engagement, and the courage to confront oppression directly, even as authorities responded with force. The principles that had guided the Malês' daily lives, faith, community, and the vision of self-governance remained unbroken, leaving a legacy that resonated far beyond the immediate events of the revolt. Ultimately, the story of the Malês' struggle for social, religious, and political autonomy is a testament to the capacity of human beings to resist domination, not only through direct confrontation, but through the careful cultivation of identity, solidarity, and purpose. It illustrates that autonomy is a multifaceted pursuit, grounded in the ability to shape one's own life even under the most restrictive conditions, and that the cumulative impact of persistent, disciplined, and morally guided resistance can create a foundation for transformative action, leaving a legacy that informs and inspires future generations. The story of the Malê Revolt in 1835 is not simply a tale of sudden uprising or spontaneous defiance. It is the culmination of meticulous planning, strategic foresight, and an unwavering commitment to freedom that had been cultivated over years of quiet resistance. The participants, numbering around 600, were bound together not only by shared oppression but by a deeply rooted sense of identity, community, and faith that informed every step of their preparation. In the months and weeks leading up to the revolt, the Malês moved through Salvador with a remarkable combination of caution and confidence, understanding that their success depended on secrecy, coordination, and the careful management of both information and trust. Each member knew that even a single misstep could provoke violent reprisals from authorities, yet the potential rewards of asserting autonomy and challenging systemic oppression imbued their actions with urgency and purpose. Communication among the Malês was central to the organization of the revolt, and it was shaped by both ingenuity and necessity. In a society that restricted their freedom and monitored their movements, ordinary channels of conversation could easily become tools of surveillance, and so the Malês developed subtle methods of conveying messages, coordinating meeting times, and transmitting instructions without detection. These secret networks relied on shared knowledge of religious and cultural practices, on the use of coded language, and on the trust built over years of communal living and mutual reliance. Meetings often took place under the cover of night or in the quiet spaces of homes, workshops, or hidden courtyards, where discussion and planning could proceed away from the eyes of overseers and informants. Even the seemingly ordinary rhythms of daily life, the movement through markets, work assignments, and social gatherings were infused with layers of hidden significance, a choreography that allowed the rebels to coordinate strategy while maintaining appearances of compliance and routine. The number of participants, approximately 600, underscores both the scale and the seriousness of the revolt, reflecting the extensive networks of solidarity that had been cultivated across Salvador's neighborhoods. This was not the effort of a few isolated individuals, but a coordinated movement drawing strength from decades of shared experience. Religious devotion and collective memory. Each person brought not only physical presence but knowledge, skill, and commitment, contributing to the planning, execution, and eventual objectives of the uprising. The organization of such a group required leadership that could navigate internal dynamics, inspire trust, and ensure that participants understood their roles, responsibilities, and the broader vision that united them. It demanded discipline, the capacity to adapt to changing circumstances, and the strategic use of every resource available to the community. Faith played a central role in guiding the organization of the revolt, informing both its timing and its methods. The Malês' adherence to Islam provided a framework for ethical conduct, communal responsibility, and moral courage, shaping how decisions were made, how information was transmitted, and how participants prepared for the confrontation ahead. The choice to act during Ramadan was more than symbolic. It reflected a conscious alignment of spiritual discipline with strategic action, a way of channeling the strength, patience, and solidarity fostered by religious observance into the practical demands of revolt. Prayer, reflection, and shared instruction reinforced bonds between participants and instilled a sense of purpose that extended beyond the immediate tactical objectives, creating a moral and psychological cohesion that would prove critical in the execution of the uprising. The careful organization of the revolt also reflected the Malês' acute awareness of the stakes involved. They understood that their actions would provoke a swift and violent response from authorities, and so every detail of the plan was designed to maximize impact while minimizing risk. Routes of movement through the city, points of attack, signals for coordination, and methods of retreat were all considered and rehearsed in the minds and conversations of the participants, forming a mental map of both opportunity and danger. The meticulousness of this preparation transformed what might have been a desperate act of defiance into a disciplined and purposeful operation, demonstrating that the pursuit of freedom can be guided by intelligence, strategy, and foresight as well as by passion and conviction. Even as the Malês moved into the streets on the night of the revolt, the presence of secrecy and coordination was evident in every action, from the timing of attacks to the deployment of small units across the city. Their knowledge of local geography, social routines, and patterns of authority allowed them to exploit moments of vulnerability and to create opportunities for the assertion of autonomy. Each encounter, each advance, and each challenge met by the rebels was framed by the prior months of planning, the cultivation of trust, and the disciplined practice of communication that had kept the revolt hidden until the decisive moment. The uprising, though ultimately suppressed, exemplified the power of collective preparation, the effectiveness of organized strategy, and the resilience of a community that refused to be invisible, voiceless, or powerless. The organization of the Malê revolt thus becomes a story not only of resistance but of ingenuity, moral courage, and communal solidarity, It demonstrates how oppressed communities can leverage knowledge, faith, and social networks to challenge structures of domination and to assert agency in even the most restrictive circumstances. The legacy of this careful planning endures as a testament to the capacity of disciplined, coordinated action to confront injustice, showing that revolts are not simply spontaneous eruptions of anger, but can be the deliberate expression of collective intelligence, ethical commitment, and an unyielding pursuit of freedom. In understanding the organization behind the Malê Revolt, we glimpse the depth of strategy, courage, and vision that allowed a community long denied its rights to step forward, even for a brief, shining moment, and claim its place in history. The night of January 24, 1835, descended over Salvador, Bahia, with a tension that seemed almost tangible, a quiet yet palpable anticipation that rippled through the city's streets and alleyways, threading its way into the homes, workshops, and hidden gathering places of the Malê community. This was not an ordinary night marked by the rhythms of daily labor or the predictable routines of a city under colonial authority. It was a night chosen with intention, steeped in both spiritual and strategic significance, for it fell during Ramadan, the sacred month of fasting, reflection, and communal devotion in Islam. For the Malês, the timing was deeply symbolic, aligning their acts of resistance with their faith in a manner that elevated the revolt from a political or social confrontation to a profound assertion of identity, dignity, and divine justice. The discipline and patience cultivated through their observance of Ramadan became a source of strength, guiding both their minds and hearts as they prepared to transform years of quiet planning, hidden education, and discreet community organization into decisive action. As darkness spread across Salvador, the participants, numbering around 600, moved with careful deliberation, each step calculated, each gesture purposeful, and each interaction charged with the weight of their mission. The months of preparation had instilled in them a meticulous understanding of the city's geography, the routines of authorities, and the vulnerabilities within the social order that could be exploited to achieve maximum effect. Streets that by day were crowded with merchants, laborers, and to patrols became pathways of coordination, routes for small units to converge, and channels for communication that only those within the network could navigate. The collective knowledge of the community of alleys, hidden courtyards, and safe houses enabled them to synchronize movements in a way that, while ultimately challenged by the overwhelming power of the authorities, reflected a remarkable degree of strategic intelligence and disciplined coordination. Religious devotion infused every moment of the night with a sense of purpose that extended beyond immediate objectives. The act of uprising was intertwined with prayer, reflection, and the ethical teachings that guided their community, transforming what could have been a purely tactical endeavor into an expression of deeply held convictions. The Malês believed that their struggle for justice and freedom was sanctioned by a higher moral order, and this belief informed both the courage with which they approached confrontation and the discipline with which they executed their plans. The observance of Ramadan had cultivated self-control, focus, and communal responsibility, and these qualities were now manifest in the careful timing, silent coordination, and mutual reliance that characterized the unfolding revolt. In each step they took, in each moment of advance, the spiritual and the practical merged, illustrating that for the Malês, faith was inseparable from action, and devotion was inseparable from resistance. The uprising was marked by both intensity and precision, a reflection of months of preparation and the shared commitment of participants who understood the stakes. They moved quickly to strategic points within the city, targeting government buildings, patrol units, and other symbols of authority. seeking to assert control and disrupt the mechanisms of oppression that had constrained them for so long. The energy of the night was charged not only with anticipation but with a profound solidarity, the kind that can only emerge when a community has invested years of trust, learning, and planning into a collective endeavor. The cohesion of the participants, their awareness of one another's strengths and roles, and the shared moral framework that guided decisions allowed the revolt to unfold with a clarity and focus that belied the extreme risks involved. Each action, each engagement, and each maneuver was informed by the combined experience, intelligence, and faith of the group, producing a moment in which history, strategy, and spirituality converged in a remarkable expression of collective agency. Even as the uprising advanced, the city itself seemed to respond to the tension, streets quieting under the weight of anticipation, while ordinary residents, unaware of the full scope of the revolt, became part of a landscape charged with the possibilities of change. The participants' knowledge of local routines allowed them to move effectively through spaces that would otherwise have been hazardous, using the cover of night, the patterns of patrols, and the coordination honed over months to navigate toward objectives with both efficiency and courage. In this way, the Malês demonstrated that the power of planning, the depth of solidarity, and the guidance of ethical conviction could create opportunities for action even in circumstances dominated by systemic oppression. The night's events, while ultimately met with suppression by authorities, revealed the remarkable capacity of the Malê community to transform faith into action, preparation into performance, and collective aspiration into tangible, if fleeting, assertion of autonomy. The revolt highlighted how deeply interwoven religious motivation and communal solidarity had become within the community, with spiritual observance reinforcing moral courage and strategic intelligence guiding ethical decision-making. The timing during Ramadan elevated the revolt from a mere act of defiance to a manifestation of the community's values, beliefs, and shared vision for justice, making it a powerful testament to the ways in which faith can shape both the means and the meaning of resistance. In retrospect, the uprising of January 24, 1835, stands as a vivid illustration of how oppressed communities can marshal their resources, knowledge, trust, skill, and conviction into coordinated action, demonstrating that rebellion is not merely spontaneous but can emerge from sustained discipline, shared purpose, and ethical engagement. The events of that night remind us that resistance is rarely a single act of courage. It is the culmination of preparation, faith, and solidarity that transforms individuals into a unified force capable of challenging entrenched systems. For the Malês, the night was both a culmination and a declaration, a statement that their identity, their faith, and their right to self-determination could not be erased, even in the face of overwhelming adversity, and that their collective resolve had the power to leave a lasting mark on the historical and cultural landscape of Bahia and beyond. As darkness gave way to the calculated chaos of revolt, the streets of Salvador became a theater of audacity and determination, where the Malê rebels, fortified by months of preparation and guided by both faith and strategic insight, took decisive action against the structures of authority that had long constrained their lives. Their targets were deliberate and symbolic, encompassing government buildings that represented the machinery of colonial control, patrols that enforced the rigid hierarchies of the city, and plantations where the labor of the enslaved was exploited under brutal conditions. Every move was informed by knowledge painstakingly acquired over time, from hidden networks that relayed intelligence and coordinated timing to an understanding of the rhythms and vulnerabilities of the city itself. The rebels' advance was not haphazard. It reflected an intricate strategy that sought to maximize impact, disrupt authority, and create openings for asserting autonomy in a space that had been carefully designed to suppress them. The assault on government buildings was both practical and emblematic. These structures were the nerve centers of control. Housing records, officials, and symbols of a legal and bureaucratic system that codified oppression. By striking at these points, the rebels aimed to challenge not only the physical presence of authority, but also its perceived invincibility, signaling to the broader population that the established order could be contested. Within the walls of these buildings, officials were met with unexpected resistance, confronted by a group whose discipline, coordination, and moral courage made them more than mere insurgents. They were representatives of a broader claim to dignity and agency that had been denied for generations. Each engagement was suffused with a tension born of high stakes and meticulous planning. As the Malês navigated the uncertainties of confrontation while striving to uphold the principles and cohesion that had carried them through the months of preparation, patrols that once enforced compliance became immediate obstacles to freedom, and the rebels confronted them with precision, turning the mechanisms of surveillance and control into arenas of direct challenge. These encounters were fraught with risk, demanding both courage and adaptability. Yet they also provided opportunities for the Malês to demonstrate the effectiveness of their coordination. Small units moved with awareness of one another's positions, exploiting knowledge of streets and alleys, and using both stealth and calculated force to neutralize threats while advancing toward strategic objectives. Each clash was not only a tactical maneuver but a declaration of agency, refusal to accept subjugation, and a statement that resistance could emerge from disciplined planning as much as from impulse. The patrols, instruments of control designed to impose fear and maintain order, became mirrors reflecting the determination and strategic acumen of those they sought to dominate. The plantations, centers of labor exploitation and daily oppression, were equally significant in the scope of the revolt. These sites represented the material and social realities of slavery, where lives were regimented, freedom denied, and cultural expression suppressed. By directing action toward these spaces, the rebels confronted the very mechanisms that sustained their subjugation, symbolically and materially asserting the right to self-determination. Workers and observers, who had been accustomed to the predictability of coercion, were now witnesses to the audacity of organized resistance, to a force that combined intimate knowledge of the city, coordinated action, and unyielding commitment to autonomy. The attacks on plantations were both practical, disrupting the operations that fueled oppression, and deeply symbolic, signaling a rejection of a system that had sought to define and limit the lives of generations of African-descended people in Bahia. The cohesion of the Malês during these operations was remarkable, reflecting not only months of planning but the integration of spiritual, social, and strategic preparation, prayer, reflection, and ethical guidance continued to inform actions even in the midst of conflict, imbuing each maneuver with a sense of purpose that transcended mere survival or tactical gain. The combination of faith and strategy created a resilience that allowed participants to act decisively despite the overwhelming power arrayed against them, reinforcing the understanding that the revolt was an expression of both moral conviction and practical intelligence. This integration of ethical guidance, community cohesion, and strategic skill exemplified the depth of planning and the holistic approach the Malês brought to the uprising, demonstrating that resistance could be both disciplined and inspired. As the rebels moved through the streets, confronting buildings, patrols, and plantations, the city itself seemed to shift under the weight of their actions, transforming from a landscape of oppression into a canvas upon which the Malês could assert agency and vision. Each step, each engagement, and each act of defiance was rooted in months of preparation, reinforcing the cohesion and morale of the participants while unsettling the authorities who had long assumed control. The combination of surprise, knowledge of terrain, and disciplined coordination allowed the Malês to achieve moments of tactical success, illustrating how careful planning and communal solidarity could transform a marginalized group into a force capable of challenging systemic power, even if only temporarily. Ultimately, the attacks on government buildings, patrols, and plantations during the Malê Revolt reveal a story that extends beyond mere confrontation. It is a narrative of courage, strategy, and the unyielding pursuit of freedom. The actions of January 24, 1835, were informed by faith, guided by ethical principles, and executed with disciplined precision, reflecting a profound commitment to social, religious, and political autonomy, even as the revolt faced suppression. The events of that night stand as a testament to the capacity of oppressed communities to marshal their knowledge, solidarity, and conviction in the service of justice, demonstrating that rebellion is both an act of courage and an expression of deeply rooted human aspiration for dignity, agency, and self-determination. The initial surge of the Malê Revolt, electrifying as it was, met with the harsh and inevitable response of the city's authorities, whose perception of threat transformed the streets of Salvador from a scene of audacious rebellion into a landscape dominated by the swift imposition of military power. As the rebels advanced through government buildings, patrol routes, and plantations, demonstrating the months of meticulous planning, the authorities mobilized militias and the army with remarkable speed, determined to quash what they regarded as a dangerous and unprecedented challenge to the social order. The reaction was brutal, coordinated, and comprehensive, reflecting the colonial administration's anxiety over the possibility that a successful uprising could inspire further insurrections not only in Bahia, but throughout the broader network of slaveholding territories. Soldiers and militia units moved through the city with precision and force, quickly identifying key points of engagement, cutting off escape routes, and systematically targeting the core groups of Malê participants, whose earlier successes now faced the overwhelming machinery of suppression. The clash that ensued was both fierce and chaotic, illustrating the stark disparity between the carefully prepared but relatively lightly armed rebels and the organized, heavily equipped forces arrayed against them. Streets that had been planned as avenues of advance became theaters of struggle, with the Malês engaging in desperate but disciplined resistance even as the military presence encroached upon their positions. The sound of confrontation echoed through Salvador, a harsh reminder of the consequences faced by those who dared to challenge entrenched power. Despite their courage, the Malês could not withstand the coordinated might of militias trained to enforce order, whose knowledge of local terrain, resources, and rapid mobilization allowed them to corner and suppress the insurgents efficiently. In the hours that followed, the city transformed from a landscape of possibility and resistance into a scene marked by the stark reality of authority reasserting control. And the initial optimism of the revolt was tempered by the immediacy of loss and disruption. Casualties were significant, a tragic testament to both the courage of the Malês and the intensity of the governmental response. Hundreds were killed in the fighting or executed in its aftermath, illustrating the lethal consequences of open rebellion in a society structured around the preservation of hierarchy and subjugation. These deaths were not only the physical extinguishing of life, but also a profound psychological blow to the community, as each loss reverberated through families and networks that had nurtured the revolt from conception to execution. Yet even in the face of such devastation, the Malês' legacy was not erased. The memory of their bravery, their planning, and their collective assertion of identity persisted, becoming an enduring symbol of resistance that would inform both contemporary and future struggles against oppression. Imprisonment and exile served as further instruments of suppression, aimed at dismantling the social and organizational structures that had enabled the revolt. Those captured were often held in conditions designed to isolate, humiliate, and incapacitate, while many were sent into exile to remove them from the familiar networks that had sustained the rebellion. This dispersal of participants sought not only to punish, but to prevent the transmission of knowledge, strategy, and morale that might inspire additional acts of defiance. Yet even these measures, severe as they were, could not entirely erase the spirit of autonomy and resilience that had animated the revolt, for the very act of resistance had planted seeds of consciousness, solidarity, and moral conviction that could not be fully contained by walls, chains, or distance. The suppression of the Malê Revolt reveals both the vulnerability of insurgent movements in the face of overwhelming state power and the extraordinary courage required to mount such resistance in circumstances of extreme risk. The juxtaposition between the disciplined, strategically prepared Malês and the swift, organized response of militias and army forces underscores the stark realities of rebellion in a colonial, slave-holding society. Every moment of defiance, every maneuver executed under the cover of secrecy, and every engagement with authorities highlighted the extraordinary stakes and the depth of commitment required to challenge systemic oppression, while the ensuing violence and retribution illuminate the formidable obstacles faced by those who sought to assert autonomy and dignity against entrenched power. Even as the revolt was crushed, the events of January 24, 1835, became etched into the collective memory of the Malê community and the broader population of Salvador, a testament to both the limits imposed by an oppressive system and the enduring human capacity for courage, planning, and moral conviction. The response of the authorities, while decisive and devastating, also inadvertently affirmed the threat that such organized resistance posed, highlighting the intelligence, coordination, and resolve of a community that refused to be invisible, voiceless, or passive. In examining the suppression of the Malê Revolt, it becomes clear that the true significance of the uprising lies not only in its immediate tactical outcomes but in the moral and symbolic resonance of a people asserting their identity, faith, and right to autonomy against overwhelming odds. Ultimately, the crushing of the revolt by militias and the army demonstrates the dual reality of resistance under oppression. The immediate consequences are often severe, including loss of life, imprisonment, and exile, yet the act of revolt itself embodies a profound affirmation of dignity, solidarity, and self-determination. The Malês' courage, their meticulous preparation, and their willingness to risk everything in pursuit of social, religious, and political autonomy left an indelible mark on the historical consciousness of Bahia and beyond, illustrating that even in defeat, the assertion of agency and moral conviction can echo through time, inspiring future generations to imagine, organize, and act in the pursuit of justice and freedom. The Malê Revolt of 1835, though ultimately suppressed, left a legacy far greater than the immediate outcomes of battle, imprisonment, and exile. Its significance lies not only in the courage of the 600 African Muslim rebels who took to the streets of Salvador, Bahia, but in the enduring message it sent across time and space, that even in the harshest conditions of oppression, people could organize, resist, and assert their humanity with dignity and faith. The revolt became a powerful symbol of black resistance in Brazil, a story of courage that challenged both the brutal systems of slavery and the social hierarchies designed to keep African-descended communities subjugated. It demonstrated that resistance was not only a physical struggle but also a moral and cultural one, rooted in identity, religious devotion, and the unyielding desire for autonomy. The Malês' assertion of Islamic identity during the revolt added a profound layer to its historical importance. In a society that sought to erase the cultural and religious practices of African communities, the rebels' adherence to faith was itself an act of defiance. Prayer, fasting, and the clandestine study of sacred texts had sustained the community in the years leading up to the uprising, shaping not only the timing and strategy of their actions, but also the moral framework that guided every decision. By organizing during Ramadan, they transformed spiritual discipline into a source of courage and solidarity, highlighting the inseparable connection between religious practice and social action. This integration of faith and resistance gave the revolt a resonance that extended beyond the immediate tactical events, creating a narrative of identity and self-determination that would influence generations to come. Though the uprising was brutally suppressed by militias and army forces, the story of the Malê Revolt became a touchstone for future struggles for freedom and social justice in Brazil. It inspired subsequent movements by showing that even under extreme conditions of systemic oppression, communities could organize, plan, and assert their agency in ways that challenged the existing social and political order. The revolt's participants, through their courage and meticulous preparation, embodied the principles of collective resistance, strategic thinking, and ethical conviction, demonstrating that liberation is not only a matter of physical force but also of vision, discipline, and solidarity. The legacy of the Malê Revolt is evident in the continued recognition of Afro-Brazilian contributions to culture, politics, and social movements. By asserting their religious and cultural identity in the face of systemic attempts at erasure, the Malês carved a space in history for Black voices and Muslim practices, reminding future generations of the importance of preserving heritage, knowledge, and faith even under oppressive conditions. Their story challenges modern audiences to reflect on the intersections of race, religion, and social justice, illustrating how the pursuit of freedom often requires courage, planning, and unwavering commitment to principles that extend beyond individual survival. In remembering the Malê Revolt, we honor not only the bravery of those who fought, but also the enduring power of resistance and identity. Their actions resonate as a message to anyone facing systemic oppression that resilience, solidarity, and moral conviction can shape history even in the face of overwhelming force. By studying and sharing the story of the Malês, we gain insight into the ways in which oppressed communities have historically navigated violence, injustice, and erasure, turning faith, culture, and strategic organization into tools of empowerment and liberation. This story is not just a historical footnote. It is a call to recognize and celebrate the courage, ingenuity, and resilience of marginalized communities. The Malê Revolt teaches us that resistance takes many forms, some visible in the streets, some hidden in the quiet acts of cultural preservation and communal support, and that each act contributes to a larger narrative of human dignity and justice. By understanding this history, we acknowledge the depth of struggle and sacrifice that has shaped the pursuit of freedom in Brazil and across the world. If you found this story inspiring and want to learn more about moments in history where courage, faith, and determination intersected to challenge oppression, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories from the past. Your support helps us continue to explore these remarkable events and share the voices that history often tries to silence. Do not forget to click the notification bell so you never miss a new story that brings history to life, revealing the resilience, ingenuity, and humanity of those who dared to resist. shape their destiny, and leave a lasting mark on the world. By joining this journey, you are helping preserve these important narratives and honor the legacy of communities who fought not just for survival but for dignity, identity, and the promise of justice. Thank you for watching, and stay curious, stay inspired, and continue exploring the incredible stories of history with us.